Welcome everybody to another episode of HR Circle. And today we are unraveling the global mysteries of HR tech with author Stacey Harris. We talked to Stacey a couple of months ago on the survey results for Sapient. And today she's here to represent her book, Introduction to HR Technologies, Understand How to Use HR Technology to Improve Performance and Processes. And what's interesting, we've known you a long time, Stacey, so thank you for joining us again. I really appreciate it. But, you know, HR has always been traditionally the last organization in the company where there's an investment in tech. I think we're seeing that change a little bit. And one of the things I love about your book, there's many things, but one is that you're kind of really approaching it from a global perspective. You've had a lot of travels around the world, so you have a lot of contacts and a lot of perspectives. And I think that's a little bit unique, although we're seeing some other organizations start to spread out into that area. And I think the book really talks about how do you think about HR tech? So do you want to give us a little recap, a little introduction to the book and why you wrote it?
Yeah, no, definitely. So thank you for the introduction, and I'm so glad to get back and see your audience again. And yeah, this book was, it was a labor of love. It was published by Kogan Page Publishing out of the UK. So it does have a bit more, I think, of an international flair, just because it wasn't published here in the US. A lot of times the US publishing houses tend to be very US centric. So, you know, it was a nice
Stacey,
opportunity.
if you would hold up the book and show us, because one of
yes,
our lucky listeners is going to get a book, right?
We are saying if you stay to the end of the book, end of the presentation, we will have not only maybe some coupon codes, but there will be some opportunity to win the book. I think I'm getting it in the camera there. Is it showing up well?
Yeah, looks good. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, it's only, I mean, it's probably about 150 pages, so it's not a huge book. But it is,
and it's very light reading, because what I love
yes,
about it is that you weave in real stories, real life stories. It's not just technical.
It was part of, you know, it was funny because, like I said, it took me 2 years to write the book. When Kogan came to me and asked if I would be interested in publishing this, I said, oh, I don't know, you know, that seems, I've always wanted to be an author. I've always dreamed of being Joe from Little Women. You know, we were, I think those of us who are from that era watched that, right? But I never thought that I could actually sit down and write a whole book, because I do a lot of research writing and a lot of papers, but they're very technical. And Kogan Publishing had great editors. They said, you know, after looking at some of the other work I'd done, they thought that I could do this. And for me, it was an opportunity to take all the stuff that I have been sort of gathering up in the last 15, 20 years of doing my HR technology work, and also put together a book that would help someone who was like me when I entered the HR tech space. When I entered the HR tech space, I was a novice. I didn't know anything about acronyms and names and all these different vendors who were in the space. You know, the only vendor I knew, funny enough, for some of our friends out in the audience who are listening from SAP, was SAP, because I'd done implementations at the company that I worked in. But there was all this, you know, PeopleSoft and, you know, PeopleFluent and all just names, you know, Kronos, ADP, things that we have seen in ages in the market. And I was a little afraid to ask questions when I first started learning about HR technology. And so I thought, well, boy, this would be a great opportunity to write down the things I wish I had been able to ask somebody, but was too scared to. So that's really what the book is all about.
Yeah, I love it. Some personal stories from Stacey, so it is really pleasant to read. What would you say is the most significant change you've seen HR practitioners face? You've been around the block a long time in the HR space. What do you think?
And part of, you know, the book, I think that what I do in the book, to your point, is I kind of walk us through where HR technology, I think, oftentimes is thought of like the starting point, right, to where I think it's heading, right? So it is a book that looks forward, but it does it with an idea that, you know, to understand our future, we have to understand our past a bit, right?
Yes.
And I think some of the biggest changes is that, like all technology, HR technology has shifted from a tool to help us improve our processes and improve our timeline and ease of doing work, to creating value in our world, right? And so the future of HR technology, like any other technology, I think that people are looking at a consumer level or at a business level, is not just how can it make my life easier, but also what can it add to my life? And that's a piece that I think we think about a lot, but we don't understand that what we want it to add to our life isn't just more financial numbers, right? It's also better personal lives and better opportunities to have interactions and more human opportunities to sort of understand people better. And to me, that's the real change that we're seeing take place in HR technology right now.
Totally agree. And, I went into HR originally, into HR, not into HR tech at first, because I wanted that connection with people and wanted to be part of that. And most human resources professionals have that same desire, but they don't always get to achieve the same results that they want because they end up being bogged down by minutia. And I think you're right. That's one of the changes I've seen in tech, to moving to more of that employee experience management, right? And how are people perceiving it? And I think companies care more today about what people think for a number of reasons. But the other thing is, when you implement HR tech, you don't see the benefits. It's hard for people to see the benefits until a year down the line or something.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Completely. So, and to the conversation we had, I think last time, which Tiro and you and I all were talking about, which is that the outcome conversation from HR technology is oftentimes only viewed, through the lens of reducing cost or reducing timelines, right? Or reducing work effort.
Headcount.
Yes, but I think, and part of, you mentioned the stories that I have at the beginning of each section, which are very personal. Part of the reason I added those personal stories, because when I first started writing the book, it was just a section by section. What is HR technology? Who owns it? Who buys it, right? What's the value proposition? All those things that you would have in a normal book about the world of HR technology. But I realized I was struggling with writing it because I couldn't explain the outcomes very well. And I thought, well, for me, I have to go back to the things I knew when I was growing up and how HR technology was impacting my life, because that's what HR technology does. It impacts human beings. And so I took stories from my life where when I was growing up and, my grandmother was passing away and we needed to deal with benefits and leave, right? And how that HR technology that my parents were working with either allowed that or didn't allow it, right? I have stories in there about when I was a waitress and how the time management system had an impact on the store's ability to keep talent, right? Those are real outcomes that make a difference in organizations. And I think, to me, that personal piece of it is what allowed me to sort of tie this book together in a way that was different than just a dry, time management is important. Well, yes, we know time management is important, but why is it important? It's because if you don't get it right, the veteran who's been there for 20 years leaves to go someplace else, right? In your organization. So those are some of the things I was really excited about that I was able to get into the book.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to mention those stories, because in the end, to be able to realize the value, whether it is value in dollars, in time, or in additional processes or additional outcomes, we need to be able to see what was before. And one of the problems with HR technology, once you're done, well, you're done and nobody remembers anymore the mess that existed before.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's really important to see to remember, to take the readers by the hand, say, this is what we've seen, and then they can start relating. That's a power of storytelling in the end.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is true. And I did start off with some stories about how technology was done poorly, right? And how it had a bad impact, and then how it had improved over time, right? Because I do think that, we take for granted sometimes just the little things like being able to pull up your benefits tool when you're at the doctor's office now, right? That seems to be a common thing you can do now, but it wasn't 10 years ago when I was taking my kids to the doctor's office, right? It was shuffling through your cards and who do I call? And those are, real life situations, that I think reminding people that these tools have changed their lives are important. Yeah.
So
No.
listen, not to plug success factors, but as a manager, now I'm approving time and travel, and I get these notices in my inbox, right? And I'm like, right, hundreds of emails to go through my inbox. I'm like, okay, right, I have to go over and do that. I have to go over and log into success factors and do that. And then I realized, wait a minute, I just open my phone, open the app, go in there, click approve, because we've already talked about what vacation they're taking, right? And it's so fast. Like that to me was like, you took so much stress off of me. Just in performing that little transaction, I was like, yes, hallelujah. Like those are things a year ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that way.
No, correct. But even things that are very mundane, the classical problem of analytics, and how many times I found myself in front of a customer, and that has no relation to the actual technology that is being used with any technology. You're in front of a customer, they tell you, oh my God, I really cannot open all this because everybody will see how dirty the data is. And I'm then saying, but it was dirty before.
Right.
It was worse before. Now you have the opportunity to see it is dirty and to correct it. Before you didn't even know.
Yes.
They don't want to show leadership. They might not want managers to see it. Is that one of the things that holds people back from investing in HR tech, do you think?
Oh,
Stacey?
without a doubt. I always laugh because I think, sometimes there's this belief, particularly on the sales part and the vendors part, right? Like, I'll show it to them. It'll be this amazing tool and they're going to want it because it'll fix something for them. I said, well, and fixing some things, right? Analytics is one of them. Talent mobility is another thing. It can sometimes create a lot of problems too. The transparency. There was a Hawaiian, a very long-standing mature school system out in the Hawaiian Islands who had implemented one of the larger cloud solutions, right? Had got one of the best in the market, and they were just really excited about it. But they started to realize that once they implemented it, that everything was transparent around compensation to certain levels of managers, right? And all of a sudden, people started to see the fact that some people had been grandfathered in or had been given separate, bonuses or, in categories, and the whole school was like, stop, close everything down. And, I think I did this blog once. It's still actually, it's on John Sumser's HR Examiner site. So if anybody follows his HR Examiner site, called organizational transparency. Is it good? Is it valuable? And I wrote it actually, so just be aware for anybody who might get triggered. I wrote it while my husband was passing from cancer. So it was a very hard piece to write, but in the context, I kind of compared the idea of when you're dealing with health issues and when you're dealing with a company, and how important transparency is. Because when you first start going through any kind of process where you're figuring out what's wrong with someone, or when you're figuring out what's going on with a diagnosis like that, right? You want to stop looking, you want to stop digging into all the things because it's so much easier not to know, right? And then once you do, you've got all this information you don't know what to do with, right? And then at the end of it, the idea is that that information will help you become better, will help improve an outcome. And, I think that oftentimes we forget that the companies that we work in are made up of human beings, right?
Oh, we do,
and
totally.
Their emotions and their reactions to things are valid, and they should be taken for the value that they bring to the conversation. And we should be okay that, yes, someone's going to be upset for a little while. Now let's figure out how we then work through that, because there is challenges. So I think your comment is right on, right? About people saying, I don't want people to know about my dirty data. I don't want people to know about, the compensation shenanigans I've been doing. I don't want people to know about, the hiring process, because maybe it's not as good as it should be, right? It's a scary thing to be transparent. So, yeah.
The other thing about the transparency and the technology, though, I spent a lot of my time in benefits. And so I had a lot of people like you calling me, and they are not in the mood for shenanigans at that point in time, right?
No.
And the thing I would often hear from my colleagues is, well, we communicated that. It's in the summary plan description, or we sent that newsletter out last year.
Yeah.
If you're using your benefits, it's just in time information that you need. You can send me all the stuff I want. I could sit there and read it. I won't remember when I really am panicking and need that information. And I think the future for technology, the future that holds for HR, is to get us out of all those little nitty gritty conversations and to be able to have warm conversations with people, because I think that holds the best chance of developing your employees and keeping them, is to really treat them
Without a
like
doubt.
people.
You know, and benefits are just one facet of the whole picture. On the other hand, and something I hear also is, yes, but wait a second, we are individual working for the organization. So in the end, it's about the benefit of the organization. But there is not one without the other.
Yes.
Correct.
I really see the relation, the contract between the employee and the employer is a little bit like personal relationships. It's like a dating game in the end. There is something in it for me and there is something in it for you. If it's not in both direction, then it breaks off. It breaks off badly for both most of the time. So, and how to figure out the way to make it the most transparent it's a progress. It's not a one moment in time. It's something that is developing, going there. And there is, yes, of course, we don't want to showcase that we were poor in the past in some ways, but we need to find a way to get out of it and better.
Get better.
Exactly. Yeah. And Kira, one of the things I really emphasize in the book, and I think to your exact point, is this is not just the responsibility of senior leaders, it's the responsibility of every HR professional, right? I think as an HR professional, it is our responsibility to understand our HR technology and to understand the data that's inside of the technology. Because if we're advising, if we're supporting, if we're giving any sort of insight about HR processes or HR work inside of the
table.
Organization, yes,
having the seat at the table, right?
We can't do that without knowing our data and knowing our systems and what they are capable and not capable of doing, right? So a big part of this book was written not for the HR technologist, for us, like, who got into this world, right? But for the HR generalist and for the, head of finance who ends up having to run HR, or for the, the learning professional who gets thrown into doing HR because, they were the only person who had the capabilities in the organization, right? It was for all of those people as well. I literally walk them through a series of exercises at the end of every section to say, go into your organization and learn this, because this will help you better understand what we just talked about for your organization. Because I do think that, to your point, it is hard for an organization to make these changes, but you can't expect them to make it if you're not willing to invest a little bit of time and understanding as well. So,
right. I love that. It's a platform to create a healthy dialogue between executives and HR and just the regular business people. The other problem I think we have in many organizations is there are people that are people leaders, and they don't have this kind of background or understanding of how HR works, right? So they tend to go to HR when there's a problem, and HR gets involved in the problems instead of having this more continuous dialogue and management of people. And it'd be great if this kind of book could help that average manager, even, in my opinion.
I hope so. I wouldn't say that it will fix all ills, but I'll let you say that. But no, I think yes, it will start the dialogue if you want to understand your systems and the data you have. That's exactly.
Yes, I think, as an HR person, I've pushed processes out to managers, do your performance appraisal, do this, and this is how you do it. And we push the processes, but do people really understand or take the time to understand what it means and the importance of it? I think that there's a lot more room for that.
Yeah.
What about emerging tech? You touch on that in the book a little bit, looking to the future. Do you see AI and machine learning as really being important to HR?
I do. I see it as being important, but I also I see, and we touched on this, I think, a little bit in the last conversation, but I think it's worth re-mentioning that And that in the book, I mentioned like, here's the artificial intelligence, here's the machine learning that's already having an impact on our systems that we may not even know about, right? The algorithms, the decisions that are being made are made off of data and benchmarking insights and training material that was our historical data sets, right? That we've been gathering for years and years and years, which means many of the outputs it's giving us is based off of however we made decisions for the last 20 or 30 years, whether those were fair or not, or biased or not,
True.
or right. So again, we were humans making decisions. That human fallibility went into our data. You know, I once had a colleague tell me, well, it's a system, it's a technology, it can't be biased. I'm like, but no, the system can only do what you tell it, but you are a human with the data. So but the other thing that I mention a lot in the book is that we have to reskill our HR function to understand, again, this gets back to knowing your systems and knowing your data, no matter where you sit in the HR function. We have to reskill our HR leaders and our HR practitioners to understand that the answer coming from the machine is now different than what it was 5-10 years ago. Originally, the answer coming from the machine was a set of data that was put in. Someone, a human being, made a judgment call about what that data would be sort of analyzed as, whether it was good or bad, or should give you a decision that was up or down. And so the answer you got from the system was always, for the most part, black and white, in the sense that it was, you know, you take this action because I get this answer, right? In the world we live in now, because a human being isn't always in the middle of that decision making, because the data was inputted, the machine, based off of probabilities, is giving you options. You have to now shift your skill set from taking that answer and doing something with it to taking that answer and weighing the value of it in the context of the world that you're living in. So if it's an 80% probability that someone might be a flight risk, what does that mean? That's not the same as this person is a flight risk, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
In the
Sorry,
end,
Karen.
it depends on the data set you feed the algorithm. If you think back to the hiring issues that were exposed at Amazon maybe a couple of years ago, that's exactly what it is. It's not that they didn't design it to be against diversity, but the fact is, historically within Amazon, white males had a successful history.
Yes.
Color.
Yeah, we're talking about Amazon, but it's many organizations.
Yeah, it's the same. I just use it because it was exposed.
Right.
It's not that it didn't exist anywhere else. There is also a set of very interesting articles on that. You know, it's done on virtual reality and so on. Joy Buolamwini, who has been doing, she's fantastic, she's amazing. She's in MIT, she works at MIT, I believe now. She's a grad from there, and she was working from grad time on virtual reality and facial recognition. The problem is, or her problem at the time was that she's of color. And the artificial intelligence is not trained. The set of information and the set of visual recognition that were fed AI at the time were essentially generic pictures, but nobody thought about including specifically women, colors, and so on. So it couldn't recognize her. She had to wear a white mask to be able to test the system she was in front.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's remarkable.
and it's simply the data set. It's not that the artificial intelligence doesn't work.
Correct. It's what you fed into it, right?
Yes.
And I think, you know, Stacey, you make another good point, and so do you, Kiara, about, so how do you predict what the best recruit is or what your turnover is going to be?
Yeah.
Because it's all relies on the data that's in there and the historical, and we can't necessarily, we couldn't have predicted COVID and the impact that would have on hiring or the environment, right?
Well, and that's, I think, the part, I think, of this next generation of HR skill sets, right, is understanding that the information you're getting back is options, right? And within
Right.
those options, you've got to add the context. And it's getting better and better about giving you context you should think about. That's, I think, that the best vendors are providing the type of things that people should be thinking about when they see that data point, right? But
Right.
I do think that we have created our historically, particularly HR, because we're very regulations and
Yes.
compliance driven. We have created an environment where we are often making decisions based off of a set of standard policies that we kind of said there's a yes or a no answer to, right? And in the world that we're heading into, we have to be much more, we have to train our organizations to actually work in the world of exceptions, because that is what's going to be the most difficult conversations to have. Because previously we just didn't have exceptions because we just wouldn't take that data, we wouldn't take them in, right? There was no exception to the conversation. Now the data is going to show you, well, if you don't give this exception, you might have some risk at some areas, right? And
It's
that's
about
the world
risk
we're in.
management, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I often think of it, Stacey, as my time in IT and planning disaster recovery. I remember the first time I had to do that, I was like, what am I supposed to think of the worst case scenario? And they were like, yes.
Yes.
You know, it's not a practice that other areas of the business have, right? And we would actually do dry runs, like, you know, this happens and all the phones are out of service, and how would you get in touch to, you know, with your employees? Like, we did drills like that. It's almost that kind of thinking that has to be taken into HR to understand, you know, are our systems and processes prepared to handle the worst case scenario?
Yes. Yeah.
How would we respond?
Or the best case scenario, or the scenario in which, you know, the company shifts direction, right? It is that idea that you can't plan for everything. There's not an option to do, but
Yeah.
that you are thinking about the context, right? And
It's
understanding the
being
world around you.
prepared to think that way, right?
Yes,
It's a
exactly.
different kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And HR has often historically, having spent time in HR myself, I will tell you that it's often like, you know, what's on the table today? You know, what's the fire drill today?
Jiro, I would be interested in your perspective on this from an international side, right? Because we oftentimes talk about, I think, algorithms and machine learning with a very US centric feel for it, right? Because a lot of it's coming out of the US, at least from the early days. There's a lot of stuff being done in the Asia Pacific market as well now. Do you feel that internationally, the rest of the world is having some of the same challenges that we're seeing sort of in the US market as well here?
From what I see, many of the international, at least the international market I know well, or I know best in Europe, essentially, tend to follow closely the US market. Certainly, some of the challenges are different in the sense that the result that are expected are different. The focus on race equality exists in Europe, but it has a different weight simply because of history. It's not a matter of lack of sensitivity or lack of interest, but it's simply DEI is not the same everywhere because the spectrum of the population is so different.
Right.
And there is a difference in the way it is perceived and the way it is understood. I think that being myself a global person in the sense that I've moved around too much probably, I see that some of the challenges is also to have our AI to understand that either to have our AI to be able to acknowledge that a person that does not say, yes, I have the official right to work, should not be necessarily discounted, particularly if you're looking for specific difficult to fill positions, but you should actually keep an eye open. Or to have, we were talking about the skills of the skill set of the people, of HR people, to make sure that they are trained to understand that what comes in as data is a suggestion. Yeah. And in some situation, you may need to go back and dig.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a skill,
it's
right?
a data point, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But the easiest approach, and we were talking about recruitment a moment ago, but the same thing is in succession in many other areas. The simplest approach is to say, well, this is what I get from the technology. This is what is true. That's what you were saying a moment ago, Stacey. If it comes out of the system, it's gold. Well, we know that there are mistakes. There are medical mistakes done on the basis of artificial intelligence. There are mistakes done. How many times the recruitment system or the succession system tells us, well, this is the most prepared person, after we have discarded all the non-relevant. But in that way, you're actually getting someone who can only do what you're actually having in the job description.
Exactly, right?
And it may not be what the position will be by the time it is filled.
Right. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we still need to have the human intelligence. Amen.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. So I keep telling people, I'm like, if anything this book tells you, HR will have a job for a long time because they're not going away.
I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was lovely talking to you again, Stacey. Great book, great job. I look forward to go through it more in depth myself. People who listen, please place a comment because we'll be.
Yes. So as you had noted, as a holiday gift, no matter what you're celebrating, hopefully at the end of this year or for the new year, I'm happy to provide a copy to someone. There's both digital and hardback. So depending on where you're located at, we'll make sure you get a copy. The other thing too is that if anybody is interested in getting a copy for themselves or anybody in their organization, and I do say this is a great book if you're trying to get your whole team on the same page about HR technology. So I've had a lot of people tell me they've bought it for their team. That's just something that I think is sort of interesting, done little book things on it. There is a code where if you go to Kogan Page Publishing, which is the publishing house, you can put in the author code capital A, capital H, capital R, 20. And that code will give you 20% off of the book purchase as well. But if you're also an Amazon person, it's available on Amazon as well. So you can just get it there, but they don't have the code available, so you don't get a discount. So
okay. I wrote that down and we'll put it in the show notes and in our tweets and everything. I appreciate that.
Definitely. Yeah, no. And I would love to hear comments and feedback. One of the things I've been thinking about is I would love to do a session where we actually had a chance to ask questions and comments. So we're on the book and the topic, because
that would be cool.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea. I'll make sure that I put a note as well in the comments for the session. So we see if we actually get some feedback.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And
thanks, Stacey. It was great to talk to you again.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful seeing you, ladies. Wonderful seeing your audience again. I hope everybody is wrapping up the year on a great note. I know it's been a rough 2 years now. And I know we're once again sort of all the news is awash with more concern about what's going on with COVID-19. But my hope for everyone is that they have a bit of a break in December, get time to spend with their families and enjoy the, entering the new year with some opportunities to look forward for everyone. So
great. Thanks so much, Stacey. It's great to see you again. Great to talk to you. If I don't get to talk to you before the holidays, enjoy your holidays with your family.
Yeah.
And Kira, we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stacey.
Talk
to you soon, Terry.
Bye for now.